Guys, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History Modern. Once again, it's going to be audio only over the lecture. Today we are finishing up Unit 1, the Global Tapestry, by learning about what's been happening in Russia and sort of Europe leaving the medieval period. So, for your bell work today, I would like you to please describe the structure of feudalism. What does that look like? Please do not copy and paste a pyramid from Google into your daily cover page, but actually describe it. Use your words. What's the relationship between the different levels in this system? So we're continuing on with our notes today, learning about Kievan Rus and the European revival. So this is in fact a under the topic 1.6. I think I call it 1.7 on our schedule. It's no big deal. Please complete a daily cover page for this nonetheless. So for your objective, this is what we are working towards today. I would like you to please explain the causes and consequences of political decentralization in Europe. So in this case, I would like you to really focus in on what's been going on in Eastern Europe as opposed to Western Europe. So thinking about Russia in sort of Eastern European, Russia is a huge territory with a huge amount of geographic differences. So in the north, close to the Arctic Circle, you have frozen tundra. Then you have very cold forests, then temperate forests, then a mix of forests and steppes, and then grasslands. So like by the time you get down to Ukraine, you're in grasslands. You also have some of the largest and most navigable rivers in this territory, including the Volga, the Dnieper, and the Don, and they all run north to south. So the people who live in this territory are going to be a mix of forest dwellers, farmers, and steppe nomads. The nomads will trade animals for grain from the farmers. The forest dwellers will provide fur and honey. So you have these caravans that go east to west carrying goods, whereas the north to south trade would be on our major rivers. So Kievan Rus is going to be a state established in Kiev, right? So think right here, capital of Poland today, but the sort of historic center of this early state. It will be established around 1880 by Scandinavian adventurers, so Vikings, right? They're going to come down through the rivers from like Sweden, Finland, and establish a state here. And they will establish authority over the mostly Slavic population. So the ethnic group living here in this part of Eastern Europe are going to be ethnically Slavic, whereas the ethnic group of the people who came in and took over are Scandinavian. So we have lots of evidence that the Vikings, these Scandinavians, will use these navigable rivers to do trade with the Turks and the Byzantines. And in fact, Slavs were commonly used as slaves. You would go and you'd capture Slavs and you'd sell them. So who were these groups of people? Who are the Kievan Rus? Well, we see that they are going to really start to closely align themselves with the Byzantines, right? So you have a lot of close cultural similarities. When you're considering like who is a useful ally, in the region, no one's going to be more useful to you than the Byzantines. The most powerful region, state in the region, also this powerhouse economically. So by the 10th century, you start to have other sort of city-states being established in this region. Dominant cities, for example, Vladimir I will rule the city of Novgorod. And legend goes, the reason why this region became Orthodox Christian was because of him. So Vladimir I is sitting around being like, what religion should I be? Well, his grandmother was Christian. He grew up polytheistic with different Slavic gods. He invited representatives from all the major religions to come and present to him about what he should convert to. The Muslims show up and they're like, let's believe in one God. He's the final prophet. You live a good life. On Judgment Day, God will view you favorably. You live a bad life. God will judge you. Vladimir's like, cool. Anything about how I live? Yeah, you can't eat pork and you can't drink alcohol. Next, I'm out. Nope, gotta have that alcohol. The Jews show up, same kind of deal. He asks, like, all of your theology sounds great. What about the lifestyle stuff? Ooh, that kosher diet would not be satisfactory for him, so he nixes it. So he's down to Christianity, trying to decide between Orthodox Christianity and the Roman Catholic Church. He ends up picking the Orthodox Church because Constantinople was a cooler city than Rome at the time. So in the year 1000, Vladimir I converts to Orthodoxy on behalf of all of his people and organizes mass baptisms and forced conversions. Like the army rolls into your village and forces everyone at sword point to get into the local river so a priest can baptize them. For the record, in Christian theology, this is not how baptism works. This is not really what you're supposed to do. But he very effectively made an entire region Christian in a short time. So he really starts to develop the Russian Orthodox Church. He uses the Cyrillic alphabet. He controls the church and really creates a literate Russian priesthood. So we see this huge wave of Byzantine influence flowing into Russia. We see that Russian acceptance of Eastern Orthodoxy will create a long-lasting connection to the Byzantines. Economically, we see that it's going to establish itself as integral to Afro-Eurasian trade as a conduit of trade between Scandinavia and Byzantium. So I'm going to go back a slide. I want to look at a map again. So here is sort of what we're considering Russia, right? This territory. Well, we know that Constantinople was this big connector between our Asian trade, either across the land, like this way, stop that, or our trade coming up from the Indian Ocean. Either way, it all goes through Constantinople and then to the rest of Europe. Great, but what about all the trade that's happening up here in the Baltic Sea and the North Sea, the fishing, the fur, all that stuff? Well, Russia is going to play the important intermediary role, right? Because you have these navigable rivers. So the Dnieper, the Volga. So all of these rivers will serve as connectors, connecting sort of the northern part of Europe with the southern part of Europe. And Russia will serve as an important economic partner sort of in this region. So luxury products from the Silk Roads will be traded for fur from Scandinavian. And so artisans will be more respected than farmers because of their skill. Thinking about their culture, well, you can really draw a direct line between like Byzantine culture to the Kievan Rus' culture to Russian culture, right? It's this mix of Slavic traditions, Scandinavian traditions, and sort of Byzantine traditions. So they're really attracted to the ceremony and the luxury of Byzantium. And the peaceful trade relationship really facilitates cultural exchange. So you see the Russian Orthodox Church absorbing a lot from the Greek Orthodox Church. Ornate churches, domes, massive cathedrals, monasticism growing, a lot of emphasis on prayer and charity. So there's an emphasis on fervent religious devotion, not really any interest in science or math, which is very different from Islam. You see the use of icons, sort of like this one, so holy images, literature, but this is again focused on religion. And over time, peasants will begin to actually earnestly convert to Christianity, not just at a sword point. So peasants were free farmers, and the aristocratic landlords were known as boyars, B-O-Y-A-R. You'll hear that term again in class. The boyars will have less political influence than similar Westerners. So it's not exactly the feudal relationship that we see in Western Europe. Considering the role of Jews and Christians in Eastern Europe, you really see that there's a competition between Catholics and Orthodox Greeks for converts. So you see a lot of Catholic converts in Hungary and Poland. I mean, Poland now is still a hugely Catholic state. But in general, communities will convert to Orthodoxy. So you see a large influx of Jews into Western Russia / Eastern Europe, fleeing persecution. This will later be called the Pale of Settlement. They migrate into the region in large numbers, and since these Jewish populations are relatively insular, they're going to have some cultural differences. So, for example, they place a high value on education and literacy for males. So, laws have been put in place about what roles Jews can play in the economy. So, Jews could not own land, they could not be farmers, they could not be lords, right? And so they're really kept to cities. And so, since they will often play the role of bankers, because there's a rule in Christian tradition based off a verse in the Bible that says Christians should not loan out money to other Christians and then charge interest on it. The Jews would play that role in the financial system. So Jews will be settling in cities. They are highly educated. They are going to begin to gather wealth because of the role that they play in commerce and banking. And this will lead to them being resented by the Christian communities around them. So, the decline of the Kievan Rus. Well, other regional leaders and princes will become rivals. You have problems of succession within the royal family, who should become king next. But it's ultimately going to be in 1223 when the Mongols invade that bring an end to the Kievan Rus. The Mongols will take major cities easily, and they will control most of Russia for the next 2 decades. Plus, the fall of Byzantium in 1453 will reduce Russia's role as a trade partner and access to their wealth. Yet, we see that Orthodox Christianity and Russian culture will remain despite political chaos. So this is going to be a continuity, a cultural continuity for the region. We'll talk a lot more about Russia throughout the year. This is just our introduction to it, really. So take a moment to reflect. How did Kievan Rus, and by this I just mean like Russia, sort of this Russian empire that we were discussing, how did it emerge? And describe its culture. Okay, please watch this crash course on Kievan Rus. You don't need to watch all of it. Watch up into the secret document or whatever it's called. Let's talk a little bit about Western European revival. So you start to see Europe emerging out of sort of the Dark Ages, this medieval period that's really marked without literacy, without technological innovation, by isolation and sort of backwardness. As feudalism develops and European states emerge and begin to have more and more contact with each other, you see Europe as a whole start to really bounce back from its post-Rome decline. So Europe will become a lot more dynamic after the year 1000. You see better plows and horse collars. So a horse collar that would sit more on the collarbones as opposed to the neck. meaning that the horse could pull more weight without choking itself. You see the shipbuilding technology diffused down from the Vikings. In cities, we see population growing, and cities are going to expand in size and in commercial activities. So you have some cities really beginning to gain independence from local authority, whether it's a king or a bishop. So we see this especially in Italy and in like Belgium. So you have these dominant city-states in Italy, Florence, Venice, and Genoa, who are going to be hugely significant in doing Mediterranean trade. And they will do trade with our Muslim empires, bringing in many goods from the different groups, whether it's the Ottomans or the Abbasids, into Europe. On the northern coast of Europe, your cities will be Ghent, Bruges, and Ypres, who will play sort of a similar role. It is at this point we really see the return of like gold coins instead of bartering. So I want to buy that. It's 5 gold coins, not give me 2 chickens. Here are our major cities. You can see their role in trade. I don't know how to say that. Ypres, I guessed. I said it with confidence, but I'm not really sure. All right, let's talk about the Crusades to finish up our unit. So, the Crusades are armed pilgrimages, which is a bit of a contradiction. Armed pilgrimages to the Holy Land by Christians determined to recover Jerusalem from Muslim rule. So first of all, what's a pilgrimage? This is a term you should already know from our earlier content, either last year or this year. So a pilgrimage is a trip for religious purposes. So if you're a Muslim and you are going to Mecca for the Hajj, that is a pilgrimage. If you are Buddhist and you want to go to a special temple, that would be a pilgrimage. If you're Hindu and you want to go to the Ganges River, it's a pilgrimage. So many Christians will go to Jerusalem, will go to Israel on pilgrimage to see the place where Jesus lived. You can do that without swords. The Crusades are going to be armed. That's going to make them different. So there's going to be 4 Crusades. The first one is the only one that's kind of valid. The Crusades are going to be significant for a number of reasons. 1, they bring an end to Western Europe's intellectual and cultural isolation. The exposure that the knights and men who go to Europe receive from visiting Constantinople, from visiting Muslim cities. They're going to see the art, they're going to see the intellectual sort of bounty, the way that the rest of the world has continued to grow and learn and how much they have learned. And they're going to come back to Europe being like, we're way behind. Like, we need to buy some of this art. We need to start thinking about these kinds of things. We see that part of the reason why you have this is because Europe had been really violent, right? You had constant invasion from Vikings. You had this entire warrior class. But then Europe became peaceful. You still had all of these warriors who are just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, and they're getting into fights. They're starting pointless wars. So we need a way to sort of deal with all these ambitious knights and nobles who want a chance to prove themselves. Also, Italian merchants desire to increase trade with the Eastern Mediterranean and possibly take over some Muslim trading ports. So there are some religious motivations to the Crusades. There are going to be political motivations. How do I deal with these unruly vassals of mine? There are economic motivations. So it's not straightforward. So let's talk about the First Crusade. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep on getting ahead of myself in the slides. So the First Crusade. The First Crusade, like I said, is the only one that's kind of valid. So, Byzantine Emperor Alexis Comnenus asks for help. He is going to specifically reach out to the Pope and Western European rulers because he keeps on being attacked by the Seljuk Turks and the Abbasids. He plays this card, right? There are political motivations as well as religious ones. It's not straightforward. So Alexius is going to want to get these Seljuk Turks and Abbasids off his back, right? He wants these enemies off his border. But what he's going to say to Western Europe is, oh, the Holy Land, like my dear Christian brothers, Jerusalem, the Holy Land of the Christians, has been overrun by Muslims. Please join me as we reclaim this sacred land. When really he's like, I need help pushing these people back away from my borders and my citizens. So it becomes a plan to reconquer the Christian Holy Land. Pope Urban II will call a meeting at the Council of Clermont in 1095, and it is going to be hugely successful. He has an overwhelming response. Over 60,000 knights join in just the first year. And one of the things Pope Urban does is that he promises forgiveness to crusaders for their sins. So if you go and you kill people, it's okay. I have preemptively forgiven you. Right? This is something that the Roman Catholic Church does that is different from our other Christian traditions. It's one of the practices that the Protestants will ultimately really criticize. Initially, it's successful. They go in, they capture Jerusalem, but ultimately it ends in defeat because the Muslim forces will retake Jerusalem in 1187. And you have to remember, Jerusalem is filled with Christians, it's filled with Jews, and it's filled with Muslims. And based off where it is geographically, it's being constantly reconquered. It's in a frontier zone. So the fact that the Christians show up are like, we're in charge now. They're like, meh, okay, great, let us know when the ruler changes again. The Crusades get to be less and less valid and more greedy over the years. As the Crusaders visit these prosperous Middle Eastern cities and see the wealth that they have, especially the wealth of Constantinople, they get really greedy. They think, why can't I just fight it, like kill people and steal it and go back home and claim it? And like, who's going to know? And the Pope already promised to forgive my sins, so why not just do these terrible things? So the Fourth Crusade is the most atrocious one. You start to see that the Muslim empires, the Seljuk Turks and the Abbasids, really begin to start fighting back. So rather than actually fight the Muslims, instead the Crusaders say, like, that's way too hard. Let's just stay here in Constantinople and take all the gold from it. So, for example, the horses atop of St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice were originally from Constantinople and just straight up stolen. They sacked Constantinople, even though the Byzantine emperor is like, hey, I invited you guys here. Like, stop being jerks. It's pretty terrible. But what's the long-term impact of the Crusades? Well, the exposure to new ideas is really going to contribute to the development of the Renaissance. So without the Crusades, we don't have the Renaissance. We don't have this return to Greco-Roman mythology and imagery. We don't have the breakthroughs in science and technology. New contact with Islam will really open Western Europe's eyes to new possibilities, especially in regards to trade. The Crusades will introduce Europe to sugar, spices, porcelain, glass, carpets from the East. And they become very aware very quickly that this is an imbalanced trade relationship. The West really wants these sort of Eastern goods. But Western Europe doesn't have anything to offer that Asia wants. So you also see the aggressive spirit of Western Europe. So this is something that's sort of different from Eastern Europe, right? Western Europe spent hundreds of years fighting each other. You have this really sort of aggressive culture emerge that you don't necessarily have in other places. So it very much emerges into a Europe versus Muslim cultural divide that you'll see continued on. You also see an introduction of new cultural ideas about philosophy, art, and even this culture of courtly love. So Eleanor of Aquitaine married to King Louis VII of France. They didn't have any kids, and so that marriage will be annulled, and she eventually marries Henry of Anjou, King of England, and she will give birth to Richard the Lionheart and Prince John. So she espouses this idea of sort of courtly love, the sort of think medieval, like, oh, a knight will take the handkerchief of the woman he loves and he'll fight for her in a joust and to earn her love. This is a new idea that's emerging. And it's one of those things that emerges because you have prosperity and stability. Okay, so there's this great movie. This is an optional video called The Lion in Winter, where Katharine Hepburn plays Eleanor of Aquitaine. This is a really good one. I would like you to watch this one, please. Again, you just need to get up to like the secret compartment or whatever it's called. Optional. Interesting if you want to know more about medieval Europe, though. Okay, let's just have some practice questions to finish up our unit. So we're going to do a source-based question for our final set of practice questions. Pause the video and take a moment to read this. So, the focus on inquiry is similar to that of the philosopher Socrates, and its reintroduction into Europe was a direct result of which of the following events? The excerpt is a representation of a new educational movement in medieval Europe based on the reintroduction of the following. Of which of the following? The new learning described in the passage is a direct result of which of the following events? Okay. So for your summary for today, please explain the causes and consequences of political decentralization in Europe from 1200 to 1450. Reflect specifically on what you've learned today about Russia and the results of the Crusades. Remember, summaries should be like 5 sentences long. Use evidence. Your goal here is to ace your summary. Answer the prompt. Cite evidence. Explain how your evidence answers the prompt. This is our overall unit objective. You have this on your overview, but I want to remind you of it. This is the unit objective that you will be answering on your unit cover page. So I want you to be able to explain the similarities and differences in the processes of state formation from 1200 to 1450. So that means you need to think about what's been happening in Africa, the Americas, Europe, South Asia, East Asia, the Middle East, right? We've talked about the entire world this time. So how have the ways that these states formed been similar? How have they been different? Remember, your goal here is, again, to ace it. Make sure you're answering the prompt. Make sure you are citing evidence. Make sure you are explaining your evidence, not just listing facts. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.